Okay, folks, I'm going to get started here. So if I could have your attention, please. Thank you. Hi, Betsy. Kind of like having to interrupt the conversations earlier. I apologize for that in one sense. In another, we have a lot of real good content, wonderful panel, and want to just make sure that we get to all of that. So first of all, my name is Rick Brimacombe, and on behalf of the Minneapolis+Club, Upsize Minnesota Magazine, and my organization, Club Entrepreneur, welcome to our Exit Strategies Workshop. Betsy here, just as a side note, helped my oldest to get into a particular college this last year, and he just returned from his freshman year a couple of weeks ago from out of state where he was. Well, anyway, for those of you who have been through that experience, you know that it's hard to watch your kids grow and then go away, and you have to let them do that. And it's particularly hard because still, to me, he's my little baby, right? So it's a hard experience, but I tied that into, in thinking about this conversation today, tied that into what we have going on with this panel. Your company is also like your baby, and you kind of remember back when it was just you in your basement or garage or with your spouse or significant other or whatever, and you put an enormous amount of work, time, and energy into that over the years, and yet eventually it becomes time to maybe let it go away. So whether you're ready for another life challenge, or maybe the market conditions are such that now's the time to sell, or maybe you're just ready to retire, this topic, this panel should be of value to you. So no matter what camp you fall into, we're here to help. Upsize Minnesota is a how-to magazine devoted to helping small business owners build bigger and more profitable companies. Club Entrepreneur and my firm, Brimacombe & Associates, support folks like you with your entrepreneurial efforts. In addition to providing actionable content, Upsize Minnesota and Club Entrepreneur can help you assemble the right resources by finding service providers such as our event sponsors, Franklin Partners, Gray Plant Moody, the Wayzata Bay Group of Morgan Stanley Wealth Management, PwC, and Sunrise Banks. So thank you to our sponsors. With that, I will introduce the panelists, and after going through that, we'll have a moment or two to hear about their specific bios. But we have Brian Toft, Senior Vice President and Manager at Sunrise Bank, Chip Myers, founder of Franklin Partners, John Peterson, Vice President of the Wayzata Bay Group at Morgan Stanley Wealth Management, Lee Jones, CEO of Robotics, Mark Williamson, attorney at Gray Plant Moody, and Tom McCarr of PwC. So now that we've introduced everybody, how about we just start? I guess we can start here, close one to me, and just give me a little bit of background on yourself and why you're here today.
Sure. Brian Toft, I've been in commercial lending for about 10 years, all with Sunrise Banks, which used to be called University Bank, Park Midway Bank, and Franklin Bank. Now Sunrise Banks merged together. I currently manage the government lending area, which includes small business loans, SBA loans, and new markets tax credit loans. The bank is focused on business loans, small to mid-sized businesses, and small enough to do local decisions, but big enough to handle larger transactions. So that's kind of me and Sunrise.
Thank you, Brian. Chip?
Hi. Franklin Partners, my firm, advises private companies and mergers, acquisitions, and recapitalizations. We focus on the under $100 million enterprise value market. We've been doing this for about 20 years. There's 4 of us. We work on a small number of transactions at any one time. We've worked in a broad range of industries. When we look back on it, we've done a lot in healthcare and medical probably because of where we are. But we also work in technology-oriented business services, niche manufacturing, distribution. My partners and I are kind of have a diverse background. My background has been in industry, buying and selling companies in the range that we represent. 2 of my other partners have been in commercial banking, private equity, and investment banking. So we feel like we bring a kind of a unique perspective to this business, and that we've sat at all sides of the table, and we can provide a well-rounded perspective to our clients.
Okay, thank you. John?
I'm John Peterson with the Wayzata Bay Group out in Wayzata, of course, with Morgan Stanley. Part of a team. I have some of my team members here, Scott Larson and Fabiano Weirson and Dave Wilkinson. And we not only do the investment management side, which you expect, but we really focus on helping people articulate what their vision is and then how to pursue that. And so there's a real transition, and we'll talk about that probably today, because with exit comes transition. But that's what we specialize with, and have a real fun time doing that. So we appreciate Rick and Beth for putting this event together.
My name is Lee Jones. I'm a founder and CEO of Rebiotics. Along with my two partners, we founded Rebiotics in 2011 to try to revolutionize how gastrointestinal disease was treated. We have, in my past life, I had another company, and Franklin Capital Partners helped me sell that business, and we have been long-standing friends since that time.
And then just as a side note, Lee was also on the cover and the lead story in the Upsize magazine issue that just came out in the last week. So thank you for your participation, Lee. Mark?
Hi, Mark Williamson. I'm an attorney at Great Plant Moody here in Minneapolis, and have two colleagues here as well, J.C. Anderson and Lindsay Day. And we're the oldest law firm in Minnesota, and I head up the M&A practice at the firm, and also chair the corporate and transactional practice. Have been helping business owners sell their businesses for over 20 years, and really enjoy the process.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Tom?
Hi, everybody. I'm Tom McCarr, and I'm a tax partner at PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers. I've spent 23 years of my career at PwC and here in the Twin Cities. And amongst other things, I focus a lot of my practice on the buying and selling of businesses. I've worked on numerous deals over my career, from smaller to multi-billion-dollar transactions. And one thing I've learned is that no deal is the same. They're all unique. Something I thoroughly enjoy, and working with primarily family-owned businesses as well as businesses that are owned by funds, venture funds, and private equity funds.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So now we've been introduced to everybody. Be an opportunity here to share with the audience story, anecdote, any other kind of little thing that you might want to share with the audience, such that they know kind of a little bit more about how you fit within the process, what your role might be, what lens you might look through. I know Lee's got a unique perspective as CEO and somebody who's exited a business. So anyway, no particular order. If somebody would like to chime in on that issue, please do.
Sure, I'll start. My job, of course, in the company is to create the value that then these people can help me capitalize on at some time in the future. So my job is to increase the value in the company in multiple ways. Not only do I have to build the business and create products, but I also have to do the networking. In this context, and in my past company, I was partially responsible for connecting with a potential partner, interviewing them, and then working with them throughout the sale process.
Okay, great. Anybody else like to share something about their world?
Sure, I'll jump in. I think, and you'll probably hear this over the course of today, the topic of timing. And what we found, we had a client who thought there was a potential purchase that was going to occur in the 3 to 5 year range. And we said, well, now's the time to build the team and develop a plan. And they're like, but it's like a fairy tale. It doesn't have any value. I can't relate to it because it hasn't occurred yet. And I said, well, now's the time, because when the event occurs, it's pretty much like changing a tire while you're still driving 60 miles an hour. So you're out on the hood just hoping you don't fall off. And there's such a lot of emotion that goes on that if you don't do the pre-planning, then when the event occurred, and it actually came sooner, it came 2 years faster than they thought, we got the call, now what do we do? Well, we implement the plan. And it was a non-emotional, just walk through it, get everything going, and it was a very peaceful event. When you try and do it the backwards way, it is very, very difficult.
Thanks for sharing that, John. Chip?
You know, to kind of follow up on that thought, most of the time when company owners contact us, they've already decided they're going to sell.
Yep.
And it's usually precipitated by a call from somebody who wants to buy the business. And more often than not, they've tried to put the deal together themselves and been unsuccessful. And so now they've sort of got one foot on the banana peel and they're moving forward. I can't tell you how often this happens. And we frequently don't find this out till after we've been engaged because they don't want to tell us about this. And maybe some of you would relate to that. But one of the things that attracted us about this panel was the opportunity to say it really behooves you to plan this out in advance because you can get anywhere unless you start with the end in mind. And it truly is a banana peel. It's a long, time-consuming process. You have to be committed to do it when you start it, and you want to pick the time to do it. You want to sell into momentum. You want to sell when your team is ready. You want to sell when you found out what your personal financial situation is. And I think probably in all the time I've been doing this, it's amazing to me that people don't really think about their personal financial situation and their tax situation until after they sign the LOI. Right?
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of things that you can do in preparation for this, and the returns are substantial. Most of the time in today's market, our clients say to us, well, how am I ever going to make this kind of money at these interest rates? And they don't have an appreciation of what they'll really be left with and what kinds of investment opportunities they have. And they could have planned for these things. So I think that's something worth considering.
Sorry, and I would just echo that is, preparation is huge. And speaking on the tax side of things, the bite, the potential bite on a sale of your business, the way as we all know, tax rates certainly aren't going down. And if you're a resident here in Minnesota, you can be looking at a potential tax burden on whatever that gain might be on your business of upwards of 50% or more. So it's huge, and that's why the point about thinking this, not reacting at the time the transaction is taking place, but preparing yourself so that you do have the right structure in place so that you can be as most tax efficient as possible when you ultimately sell is absolutely critical, for net after-tax cash that ultimately, you receive upon the transaction.
Great, thanks, Tom.
One other thing I would add is, Chip will do a good job and get a very high purchase price. And the one thing business owners don't realize is there's so many different ways that purchase price can be eroded. And it can be taken away through things like purchase price adjustments in the purchase agreement that would reduce the amount of purchase price that's paid. You'd have to pay some dollars in for that adjustment. There could be indemnification claims or liabilities, all of which erode what you see as a high purchase price on the front end. The other thing that can be a huge issue are earnouts, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, during the course of this. But I haven't had a deal yet where the seller assumes they don't have to pay the earnout, and the buyer assumes they get backwards. I got it backwards. Seller doesn't assume that they're going to get 100% of the earnout, and the buyer doesn't assume they're going to get pay any of that earnout. And I always tell people to think of it the opposite way.
All right. Brian, anything you want to chime in here?
Can I just add a comment?
Sure.
And maybe this sounds like a little bit of a plug for some of my friends on the panel I've worked with. But I think if you're selling a business, you got to figure that you're dealing with rational professionals who have the A-team. And it really behooves you to have the A-team on your bench or you're going to be outgunned. And this is a business where you can get outgunned. And if you buy something for less, you're going to make more money on it, right? Buy low, sell high. You're a seller. And it behooves you to have people who know what to do, have a lot of experience. And my experience is that in lots of smaller companies, their tax guy's done a great job for them over time, but really doesn't understand the nuances of transactions things. They'll say, well, do a stock sale instead of an asset sale. It's a lot more nuanced than that. Same with their personal financial advisors. They haven't managed this sort of level of assets with somebody. And same with the attorneys. They may have had somebody who's been a general counsel who's done a great job at negotiating contracts and things, but he's not a transaction guy. And people like Mark, who are transaction guys, see dozens of transactions a year, and they know what the market is, and they know they've seen people get skinned a million different ways, and that's invaluable to you. And the other advisors don't appreciate it because they aren't in that game. So they aren't going to tell you to do that.
All right, thanks, Chip. So just how I've organized my thinking for today is I got kind of 3 buckets of questions. I have the before sale, during the sale process, and then the after the sale. I'm going to kind of walk through my list. However, I want this to be open, and if you ever have a question or want to make a comment, please jump in. It should be interactive. This is your session, not mine. I'm just kind of leading it and facilitating it. So anybody has any questions along the way, please just raise your hand and we'll get you in. Was there one back there right off the bat? No, just waving. You're waving at one of our panelists. Flirting with one of our panelists. All right, well, the lady in red. Okay, so the before the sale process. First question I have here, and Chip kind of alluded to this, and so did Mark a little bit, is when do you begin the process? What do you keep in mind as you're starting that process, and what can you do now to better prepare you for the future and for a transaction? And whoever wants to chime in, feel free.
I can jump in. I actually put a handout on the table that you should have on preparing to sell your business, and it has some thoughts that we'll touch on here. There's a lot that can be done in advance of selling your business. And as Chip alluded to, we often get involved when there's a letter of intent, hopefully before the letter of intent is signed. If you want to get the best bang for your legal dollar, get your lawyer involved before the letter of intent is signed. They can provide a lot of help at that one little phase before you sign a purchase agreement. Get your accountants involved too at that phase. But there's a lot of things that you can do in advance. One of the things that I see as a really important thing is trying to figure out some ultimate goal for the transaction. So different sellers have different reasons they're selling their business, and figuring out what is driving that sale process. Is it to maximize price? Is it for philanthropic purposes? Is it to transfer the business to your children? Is it to sell a portion of the business in advance rather than all of it, and stay involved in the business? Trying to figure that out on the front end can really help drive the sale process.
But I would like to make the point, too, that somebody else had said, you start with the exit in mind. Our company is funded by outside investors, so I'm not the only owner. And as we founded the company, we started plotting out our stock strategy, how much we'd sell now, what we would do for a B round if we needed it, what the C round would look like, so that everybody along the way could make money. And as I also invest in companies, and what I've seen is that some of the companies don't think about the structure of their business and they just start handing out equity. And by the time you get done, you've got a huge denominator and a little tiny numerator that you're trying to divide among all these shares. So I think planning for the exit, I don't know, somebody down here said that, at the very beginning when you're thinking about your company, or even if you're in process, really pays, I think, over the long run.
Mm-hmm. I think the analogy that I would use is like selling a home, which many of you probably have done. You know, we think that flowered couch is something special, and if you don't have a team around, you need that fresh set of eyes. You also psychologically have to be prepared not to be hurt, because what you think is a awesome looking couch might be too bulky, and your team might come in and say, we need to restage this. And so you have to be willing and have park your ego on the side to understand what is the end goal here. The end goal is to try and maximize the price. So you have to focus on the top line, but you also have to focus on the bottom and have that team in there with a fresh set of eyes that can honestly look you in the face and say, we need to restage this just a little bit to make it more appealing for the buyer. I mean, when we sold our house, our walls never looked so good, our landscape never looked so good. You know, we've all done it. And you walk away going, why am I moving from this place? I finally got it the way I want it. And you're going to have that experience too. Because this is your baby. And you're going to buff it out and you're going to walk away going, wait a minute, what? Why am I getting rid of this? And so you have to be prepared for that. It's a real psychological change.
And I would just kind of piggyback on that. You kind of almost what I think is important is put yourself in a potential buyer's shoes in terms of as you're thinking about preparing, and that is what would a buyer want to look at in your business, and really critically analyze, what are the good aspects about your business, what are some weaknesses, and be really focused on the weak areas, to make the house or make it look prettier. On the tax side of things, one of the things I come across a fair amount, both on the buy side due diligence and the sell side is, something as simple as if you're an S corporation, which is a flow-through entity, a buyer might come to you and say, well, prove to me that you're an S corporation. Show me your election. And I've seen situations where the seller is not able to produce that, and it results in a lot of angst. And whether in the form of an indemnity or some kind of purchase price adjustment. So that's just a real simple example, but just putting yourself in the buyer's shoes and asking yourself, what is a buyer going to want to look at here? In my mind, is very, very important.
Anybody else want to chime in on that one? No? All right. So Chip, earlier in one of your comments, you talked about the timeline and kind of getting on things early. If you're not wanting to wait for somebody else to kind of push you down the road, when do you start looking at this, and how do you kind of come to that conclusion, and what's your thought process?
Well, I guess first and foremost, it's a personal thing. If you own your business, you're the sole owner of your business. It's when you're ready to make, when you're ready to move on with something new in your life. But apart from that, it's just kind of the basics. You want to sell into momentum, which means you want to sell when there's good fundamentals in your marketplace or your industry, when your earnings are good and growing, and the prospect can easily be explained or demonstrated. You want to, if your objectives are to get out of the business, you want to do it when you have management in place to replace you. Believe it or not, although most of the discussion when the negotiation takes place around financials, management, the availability management, experienced people in the business is a real value driver. And, sort of the common misconception is that, well, they'll buy it and cut everybody out. And no, it's really not that. I've rarely seen that happen. What they've maybe done is buy it and replace people with stronger people. But, there's a lot of capital in the world, but there's not a lot of talented people when it gets right down to it. So, maybe to summarize, it's a personal thing when to sell, but you've got to sell into momentum. Nobody buys this based on how well you did 5 years ago. They buy it based on what the future cash flows of the business are going to be.
Anybody else want to talk to a timeline?
One thing, if you have estate planning goals in mind, transfer of wealth to your children, grandchildren, donations to charities, anything that involves using the purchase price for some sort of gifting, it's really critical to do that at least well in advance of the transaction, typically a year in advance. Work with your estate planning attorney, your wealth advisor, and make sure you set up the right vehicles for the deal. You can save just enormous amounts in taxes and put aside a lot of money and transfer it on to your children, grandchildren, and do it in a very tax-efficient manner. Once you have a signed letter of intent, there's very little you can do to prepare for the sale on sort of a personal side. So I think it's really critical to if you're a year away from it, start that planning process right away.
Well, I'd like to speak to the proactive piece too, as a funded business and not a business owner, sole owner. One of the things that I do is I'm constantly scanning the market and looking at what are the companies or who would be a potential purchaser of our company maybe sometime in the future, and meeting those people and developing a relationship with them, because these things just don't happen overnight. So some people, same thing in terms of fundraising, but the more they know you and they see the progress that you're making and they can put a name with a face, makes it more likely that they'll be coming to the table for a purchase at some time in the future. So as a business owner, you don't have to wait till somebody else comes to you. You can reach out, even if your plans aren't for years to sell. It still is helpful, kind of getting back to Chip's comment, to know where the momentum is and when the right time is, so that you don't let that opportunity pass by.
And on that point too, your team that we talked about earlier is going to know a lot of those people too. Your attorney, your banker. I mean, those people have connections with others that might be looking to buy a business, and so it's important to reach out to those folks and just let them know your plan way ahead of time as well.
Great, thanks, Brian. Chip, were you going to say something? I'll get to you in a second.
If you hire somebody like us to execute a full process, which is, developing an investment thesis and preparing presentations and putting together a buyer's list and executing a sales process and then going through a diligence period that probably takes 90 days, you're talking about 6 to 12 months to get it done, if everything goes right. And I can tell you, I think all these guys can tell you, it never goes right.
Good thought.
All right, Beth.
I had a question, John. You had the analogy of, the crazy flowery couch in your house.
Right.
What's a couple, 2, 3 equivalents in business that if you're preparing, you just want to make sure you get rid of those, because every prospective buyer is going to be looking for, what is it? Top 2, 3 things.
Chip probably could answer this better than I, but I think it comes into, it could be product. You might have some passion for some product that's outdated and just is an anchor, but to you, that's your passion. And so you have to separate yourself from that to look with fresh set of eyes on that. And then it could be personnel, and that's hard, because like Chip said, the greatest asset you have are your people. You can have all the equipment in the world, but if you don't have somebody to work with it, it's worthless. So it's hard to look and say, Billy Bob or Susie Q, have had them for a long time, but now we want to go to the next level. And unfortunately, they don't have the skill set to get to there. But a mentor coming in might be able to bring them up on board, but you have to make that decision. And that's tough. And then if it's family owned, it's even worse. Because now you got to sit down at Thanksgiving and go,
Sorry,
son or daughter, I love you, but you can't cut it on your own. You're not there yet. And those are very difficult conversations. But a team can bring expertise to help you through those discussions.
Frequently we look at something and to us the valuable attributes are not what the owner emphasized when he hired us. And I'd give you a couple of examples because we've worked in this space a lot. Business services with some element of technology invariably acquire a lot of information, and that information, we have worked on deals where that information was more valuable than the process that they were selling to get that information, leveraging that information for other things. We worked on a deal where a company collected probate estate data for use in filing claims against the estate, credit claims against the estate. But in the course of doing that, they actually developed a death list that was bigger than the Social Security death list, which is the gold standard of if you're dead or alive. You don't want to be on that list. And it's you may have been reading about it. It's what's largely used for detecting credit fraud. Most credit fraud is done against people who have passed away, or they steal people's identity. And these guys had a list that had 15% more names than the Social Security system. That was really a valuable thing. And it was a valuable thing to a different set of buyers than they hired us thinking we would go to. And, that's the kind of thing that happens.
And I can reinforce that, because the company that Franklin helped me sell, we had developed a large national sales organization. And interestingly enough, the product that we had, the company said, yeah, it's nice, but we really like your sales organization because we have we have products that we can put through there, and we don't have a sales organization like you have. So they bought us and absorbed my entire sales organization and have been running with it ever since. So that turned out to be something that I didn't expect to emphasize what Chip said.
Tom, how about audited financials?
How about them?
Clean financials.
So, depending on who ultimately your buyer will be, many times they're going to insist on having audited financial statements. At a minimum, many times, of course, transactions occur mid-year, but at a minimum, they're going to want some credibility behind your financial statements, as they're conducting their due diligence. So, depending on your circumstances, you may have an audit that is required, or maybe a review. But in any event, I think, kind of getting to this notion of being well prepared is you want to make sure that you've got some credibility behind your financial statements, so that when a buyer starts looking at them, they have something to rely on. And I think everyone is aware, an audit provides the highest level of credibility and assurance. Although, however, there's a cost that goes with it. It's quite a bit more than a review or a compilation. And that's just something you need to weigh as you're thinking about this. Is it worth the investment to receive an audit that, again, a buyer will rely on certainly more than a review or compilation? So something to think about.
Looking back, 1 year, 2 years?
It depends. I mean, I would say for sure at least 1 year, and the more years the better, but at least 1 year, if not 2.
One thing that I see happen a fair amount is that a business owner somebody will contact a business owner and say, we're interested in buying you. And that'll get the business owner thinking about selling the business. One of the first things that the prospective buyer says is, we'd like to see your financial statements. Mm-hmm. And we'll send over send us your confidentiality agreement. Make sure you sign confidentiality agreements. Send over a confidentiality agreement. We'll send you your financials. That can be risky because sometimes in those financials, you're not putting forth your best picture of what the business is like. And people like Chip and his colleagues can help you scrub your financials and really take out some of the, you're paying for the second house in some location, and your cars.
I don't think there are any IRS agents here,
no.
So we could.
Your cars are, quasi-company cars.
The related party stuff, basically, right?
Yeah, so you take a lot of that stuff out, and your financials, the way you present your financials can be very different from how they appear on a reviewed or audited financial when you're trying to sell your business. So I think taking a step back, looking at that, and getting someone to help you make the best presentation possible is a very important first phase. Question?
Yep. Oh, we got something over here. Yeah, Lois.
In that regard, so the request comes, and they're not scrubbed yet, and you have the clause that's a pregnant clause before you say, yes, I'll do that right away, and here's the confidentiality document. How do you deal with that pregnant clause? And just how negative have you seen it be?
That's a good question. I would say that I talk to a lot of clients. I'm actually dealing with this right now with a client, small consulting business that the big player, the big fish in the industry wants to swallow. And the client didn't want to wait until we've had a chance to clean up their financial statements and present it in the most positive light. And my caution to them was let the buyer know that these are your preliminary financials. There's a lot of inter-party transactions. Related party, thank you. That's why you don't get lawyers doing your accounting. Related party transactions in there that we need to back out when we come up with an actual earnings number, or somehow couch what you're providing them with. Yeah, but we're going to give you this, but you'll be expecting to see something different down the road. There are things we'll need to back out.
So you would prefer to move forward and transfer some information as versus ask for a hold?
It's a little bit like dating. You want to flirt enough. I've been married 23 years, so I'm so out of this. But so if
Ask the lady in red back here about the flirting.
yeah, and you probably want to add to that too. Okay, so pre-internet days, but you want to give enough indication that you're interested in continuing to go out, but you want to keep your options open. So I think providing some information in advance is a good thing. And I think it's hard, particularly if it's reviewed or audited financials. You're not changing those. They are the historic financials. It's when you're providing projections, sort of reconciliations of your audited financials. That's where it's helpful to get somebody involved who can help you present it in the best light. Projections are I don't know if, Chip, you have thoughts on projections, but that a buyer is always going to say, send me your historic and your 3 to 5 year projections. And usually it's, a hockey curve or hockey stick curve that you're thinking your business is going up. And, and frankly, that's where I think investment bankers add the most value is helping you with those projections and presenting your business.
Okay, so if we use the financial discussion to kind of segue to during the transaction process away from what we were doing before the process, ultimately everybody's focused on the price, and clearly there's a lot of other things to think about, and not just the price, but with the price in mind and valuations in particular, what are some high-level kind of overview thoughts, and maybe Chip, you could lead us with this, as to different methods that one might use to kind of estimate what the business might be worth. Just high level. We're not talking finance stuff here, but just high level.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would, I'll go out on a limb here and say, if you've got a business that's maybe a traditional business, it's been in business a long time, it's made money, and it's under $50 million in revenue, it's probably, as a starting point, would trade around 5 times EBITDA. And then there's plus or minuses that would add to it. Customer concentration would make it less valuable. Expected growth rate would make it more valuable. Strong management team would make it more valuable. Barriers to entry or significant competitive edge would make it more valuable. And I think that by answering that might give you our perspective on this. We would never respond to somebody by just sending them the financials, because you're going to get just a numbers valuation. A guy like all of us, once upon a time, out of business school, has a model, and he's going to put it in there, and it's going to kick out a number, and it's completely predictable what it's going to be. So when you think of your business, I mean, I think of, it's just something in this range, and then what are the attributes that I have that are more valuable? And then, but ultimately, what's going to drive the value is the buyers you present it to and how many of them are interested. Because if a buyer doesn't have, if he thinks you're the only game you're talking to, there's no way he's going to pay you what it's worth. And everything you say to him up to that point will be used against you in the negotiation. So it's a real thoughtful game, and valuation is in the eyes of the buyer.
Other than EBITDA, anybody want to add to that? Any thoughts on revenue multiples based on customers, anything else? All right, well, I'll throw one out then on the revenue thing, especially with the more technology-oriented businesses, and Chip can chime in too. I'd argue that revenue multiples potentially are even more valuable than the EBITDA multiples, but again, it's on who you present it to, how valuable the property is.
Well, and what stage of development the company's in. I was talking about companies that have been around, but if you've got a company that's, growing and you're reinvesting all of your earnings into making it grow, then it's likely to trade on it'll be characterized as a revenue multiple when the time comes. But that doesn't mean that that's how value is determined.
Let's see. Confidentiality. Mark, you brought it up earlier. What should somebody do during the process to make sure that their confidential information is treated as such, trade secrets are kept, and so forth?
So if confidential information is important to the business, so any trade secrets or other proprietary information, it's important to get a confidentiality agreement in place before you share any of that. That's kind of the sort of standard basic step you want to take. But what's more important is that you are careful as how you provide that information. So if there is certain confidential information that's critical, so your secret sauce, don't put that in the data room at an early phase or send that to the buyer. They may be able to look at that, get the information they need, and you'd be stuck bringing a lawsuit against them for breach of the confidentiality agreement. So there's ways you can stage your due diligence and providing that information to better protect yourself from improper use of it. Particularly if you're a small company and you're selling to a larger company, you're not going to want to take on, a giant Fortune 500 in a lawsuit. They've got a few more resources than you do. And so trying to do what you can to protect that information by not providing it until you absolutely have to is key. I do a lot of software deals, and source code is one thing that we always tell our clients not to provide your source code until the closing, so that somebody can't recreate your software and get around the technology in a different manner.
We have a question over here, Dave.
Back to the evaluation of the company, how do you figure in the brand value of the product? There's EBITDA, there's financials, but if you have a brand that has value, how is that determined?
Well, I don't know that if I were a seller, I would spend too much time thinking about that. I would be thinking about potentially who is this brand most valuable to, and then I would take it. I would take the opportunity packaged the right way to them and let them decide what it's worth. And I would figure that if I took it to enough of the right people, I would get the right number. I would get the best number. I think one of the big fallacies of valuation, I'm probably going to offend a bunch of people, is I don't think valuations per se are worth anything. They're a stagnant thing. They exist unto themselves. They're based on a series of assumptions that most likely will never take place. What you don't know is what's in the head of that corporate development person. They're never going to put that in your annual report. It's a trade secret. You're never going to pull it out of their analyst presentations. So what you've got to do is run a good enough process where enough of those people get the right information and not too much information, but enough to put a value on it, and you can play them off each other. Because otherwise you just go at this forever. You'll be talking to yourself about this.
That answer your question. We got another question over here, Tom.
When on the timeline do you start talking to the key people?
You mean your employees? Well, it depends upon whether they need to be involved in the process.
Assume they do.
Well, then I talked to them as soon as I could, because I'll tell you a little anecdote if I can. So we're hired by a company that's they call themselves a contract manufacturer in electronic space. They assign us, the owner assigns us to the CFO. The CFO is clear to me after the first meeting, doesn't have any idea about really the products that they're making. So we go back to them and say, look, we've got to have access to the key engineering person and the VP of sales. And after, explaining to him what the problem was, he gave us that, and he had a talk with them and explained to them the importance of it. And this fellow happened to be like 70 years old, so, it wasn't any surprise that he'd be retiring. And these people gave us an insight into it that was entirely different, that resulted in a significantly better outcome than we would have imagined. And he just didn't know. So I think it depends upon how important they are to the process. Ultimately, in diligence, they're going to need some access to some people. And there's this, the way we do the process before that, before we get a final offer, we have meetings where we have the company present information, and we like to have as many of the key managers participate in that as possible, who can be trusted and who are key to this. So I guess the answer is it depends upon the situation. But if they're key to sale, then they got to be involved.
One of the concerns that people have is that by telling them, your employees, they'll either get scared and start looking for a new job, or try to sabotage the sale, or whatever it is. But one of the things that, assuming these are not owner, it's a different situation where you have an owner, but you could put what are called stay-in-place packages in place for the employees. So a bonus that if they stay through the closing of a transaction, they'll get paid a certain amount. Something to keep your key employees engaged in the process and around until closing. And hopefully you can even do it post-closing, but that's more the buyer's issue.
And Lee, when you went through the sale process as a business owner, business leader, when did you bring your folks into it, and how did you manage that process?
We brought our key management in after we had decided that we were, Engaged Franklin Partners had gone through a number of discussions, and then when it came time to actually have face-to-face meetings with some of the potential buyers, I needed them to stand up and tell their story. So we talked to the group as a whole at that time and did, what you talked about was talked about retention, what the expectation was, so that they knew they were part of the process and weren't going to get dumped by the side of the road. So that actually worked out pretty well.
All right, good. Ward.
Yeah, how often do you find that after you have a transaction, agreement, and then it starts down the path, that it goes off track and you don't close? And how often does that hurt the company?
Good question.
I'll take a shot at that. In the 20 years I've been doing this, that's only happened twice. Once we closed the deal and the money was escrowed, and the next day the owner was to meet with a significant customer with the buyer. And when he went in there, so when the guy says, yeah, we love these guys and we'll continue working with you, the money would be released. But we went in there and the buyer said, well, as a matter of fact, we're going to be using a new source for this later this year. That killed the deal. And, I don't know what happened, what the prospects of that were for the company long term. But I'll tell you, there's a million, I'm sure Mark can tell you, there's a million things that go wrong that could kill the deal. We just had one where, so we're 2 weeks away from close, and they want to do background checks on the key people. Not an unusual thing today. Something to consider. New lesson learned. Well, so they come back and say the guy that you've hired for president doesn't seem to have attended this college. He's 50 years old, so we're talking about 30 years ago. But, so my partner, who's a wonderful person who believes that people do well, calls this fellow and says, there must be a misunderstanding. And the guy sends over a scanned copy of his diploma, and my partner Joseph fails on the hall. Hey, Chip, come here. And I go in there, and he hands this to me, and he says, does this look funny to you? And I said, well, they spelled university wrong. So, we had to be, the only way we could save this deal was to be completely open about this. But it came to a complete halt, and the buyer said, for 6 weeks, didn't want to talk to us. And it took that long, really, for our client's attorney to ascertain that, in fact, this guy wasn't there, and to come up with a proper way to release the guy so we don't have a wrongful discharge thing, and for us to come up with a plan, which was that the current president would stay in place, and we came up with some ideas of maybe some holdbacks to help, and they still wouldn't meet with us. Now, a lot of people would give up at that point and move on, but the way I look at it is, we've been working with these people for a year. They're our partners now. We took their money. We're going down the line with them on this deal. So we finally convinced the buyer to meet with us in another city and brought in our client. My partner handled this so well. He never brought the issue up. He just said, let's talk about what it means to be partners and what it'll mean for the two companies to go forward. And the conversation went from there for 4 hours, and we closed the deal. But, it's about giving up. My view. Every once in a while you hit something that you can't overcome. But
I would say that that's right. If by the time you get to a signed purchase agreement, the vast majority of deals do get completed. Even if there's something that happens between signing and closing, you generally work through that. From a letter of intent, so the term sheet type phase through closing, it's a much lower percentage. And that's where a lot of business owners kind of have an emotional attachment once they sign a term sheet or a letter of intent that they've agreed to sell the business and the other side has agreed to buy it. Generally, that's not the case. It's an agreement to agree. And a lot can happen between that signing of that term sheet or letter of intent and closing that can derail the deal.
You know, I'll pigtail off that. I think one of the other things, and you see it a lot, is, in Chip's comments kind of bring it forward, is even if you hire the A-team, you're still going to have to be on the field playing. It takes involvement. It's a lot of work. There's days you're going to walk away going, what in the world am I doing? It's going to drive you nuts sometimes. But that's where the team comes in. And you need to rely on them to keep you, like Chip's partner, could diffuse the issue and say, let's get back to what's really the forward vision, not 20 years ago or 30 years ago on a resume. You know, plus spell check would help.
If you've got a good team, they will set out to uncover all the issues they can ahead of time.
Best you can.
And you will be, very impatient about that, but it's worth it. Because if we can understand what we got to deal with, then my theory is my energy is available to deal with the thing I never expected, and because it's going to happen.
Okay, Tom.
Can one of you describe just the sequence and the key terms involved? I mean, valuation, term sheets, confidentiality. I mean, what's the order of this thing?
Want me to do that?
Sure. Go ahead.
So the first thing you'd want to sign generally is a confidentiality agreement. So in taking a seller through a sale process, even before that, you have your pre-sale discussions. And one of the things that I always advise sellers is get an investment banker involved or business broker, depending on the size of the deal, but get a professional involved to help you sell the business rather than trying to sell it yourself, because the only thing that creates value is competition. And without that, you're not going to ever realize the full value of your business. So that would be the first thing I would do. Then I would, as you reach out to people, you sign confidentiality agreements. Chip's group would send out information memorandums, so confidential information memorandums. People will do bid letters for that, and then eventually somebody will sign a letter of intent, and that's with one party generally. I have had a deal where we negotiated 3 letters of intent with 3 people, 3 purchase agreements with 3 people, and right before we signed, we picked one of them, which was a very odd situation. But you're going to sign your letter of intent, and that's what starts the timeline going on the deal itself from the legal standpoint, where due diligence will happen, negotiating purchase agreements, negotiating employment agreements, all the other documents that go with the transaction. Then you'll have a signing where you'll sign that purchase agreement, and it's like buying a house. You're signing a purchase agreement to buy the house, then you close and change keys. After all those, the financing gets in place, the people who have to consent to it consent to it, and all that happens, and then you close, and then that's when you get the key. And that's when the fun really starts. So.
Well, yes, you guys mentioned a lot about the business that already have revenue. Also, I'm going to ask the other side, which I'm not sure how many apply to people here. But what about the business that doesn't have revenue? Like, especially medical stuff. This, this is a medical device town too. Can you make a comment? Obviously, I look at Joe's lead as well, but I also want to hear from others too. My question is, what from your experience, what would drive the values for the business that doesn't have revenue yet when we need to sell?
Well, on the medical side, it's obviously data. You've got your prototype of your product, you've gone through clinical studies, you're in a marketplace that's hot and people are really excited about it, and you've got people on the other side, the companies that have a strategic interest in what you do. Without that, it's, at least on the device side, it's hard to sell something pre-revenue. At least all the transactions I've seen have been where there's a high strategic interest in an area that's moving and people are trying to do plays. I don't know from, that's, you know, if you've sold companies that are.
Yeah, I would say that's the case. It's got to be you got to have a demonstrated solution that works in a area where there's a lot of people are spending a lot of money to do what you've done, and then it's a question of what they'll pay for it. I don't think that there are any metrics that you could apply to that. It depends upon the size of the opportunity. You might be kind of inferring from what I'm saying. In our view, the buyer sets the price. You don't know what it's worth to him. The buyer sets the price.
In those pre-revenue companies, typically there's a smaller pool of buyers, and there tend to be players that you know. There fewer financial buyers are going to, at least I've seen, are going to come into a business that's pre-revenue. So you may have a smaller pool of potential buyers. But in the tech area, there's a lot of, I mean, the apps and all the software companies, a lot of them are, I've got a client right now that's in a process pre-revenue, and we don't know. eBay likes it, maybe we got a great deal. If eBay doesn't, we go to Google. If they like it, then we got a great deal.
The other side of that question, if I may, like what about the management team? I think that, like, you know, for the because we still pre-revenue, and you know they still have to develop a lot further from that. Like, what's the role or the importance of the management team in you know, for the acquisition or selling?
Well, I can tell you, nobody would buy you if you didn't have a good management team, because that's what they're relying on. They're believing you when you say, "I've got this, and here's the data, and here's what's going forward." So, to me, it's crucial. But I don't know. Maybe somebody else has a different point of view.
That's probably right. You have to have the people move
Right.
it forward.
I had a question or two over here. Adam?
So my question is going to be very narrow, so you could broaden it.
Can you speak up a little, Adam?
Sorry. The question is relative to litigation. My company actually is suing a lot of people for infringing on our patents. Do we stop that for the purpose of sale so that there's not transactions in process? And then a broader question for anyone else in the room is, you know, what if you're in litigation? What are you trying to solve those problems before you go to sale? So my question is pretty specific for hybrid companies.
So I think what I heard was, Adam, your company is suing some people in a patent issue. So you're on the offensive side, and the question was, do you stop doing that for the sake of a sale? And the other would be, let's say you're being sued. Do you kind of quickly try to solve it, even though maybe it's a little more expensive or something that you don't want to do, but you solve it to get ready to go sell your company? All right. I think
Everyone points to me.
Back. Out of the way.
A couple of thoughts. One, if it's part of your business model to bring these claims to protect your intellectual property, then continue to do that. I mean, I wouldn't stop what you're doing in good business, you know, from a good business standpoint. Continue to do that. I do think it's helpful. I had one deal where we were in this, it was 5 times bigger than this hall, and it was an old railroad station or engine repair shop, and it was like 100 years old. And we were buying private equity buy side, and we were walking through, and the owner of the business said, "Oh yeah, we're being sued for environmental liabilities or environmental pollution." And I'm looking around this thing thinking, "Yeah, no kidding." And we walk in, and he said, "Well, that's where the oil tanker's buried." And all you could see under the cement was a little stack with a rock on top of it. And inside of it was an old tanker car full of oil. And it was leaking, and they had to clean it up. Don't tell me that. You know, get it fixed in advance. You know, so there are certain things like that you just, no, you don't go to market knowing you have an oil tanker buried in your property and it's leaking. Don't go to market. Get that cleaned up first. Settle that.
You know, all the lawsuits will all be disclosed, And I agree with Mark that if it's part of your business to defend your intellectual property, then you're probably adding value. But on the other hand, if you've got like, 6 sexual harassment suits going on, I don't think I'd go to market with that.
No. Employment, that's a good point. Employment, clean up your shop on employment in advance, because, employment lawsuits are a big red flag to buyers.
Yeah. I mean, it isn't just that they'll withhold money to cover it. It's an indication of, possible indication of more systemic problems and a management issue.
Okay, I had 2 questions over here. Let me start with Mike, and then we'll get to you, sir.
We were just talking about externals here. I'd like to go to the soft side of transactions. What happens if you've got a conflict on the board, for example, about lack of consensus about selling? What happens if you're 100%, if there's entrepreneurs in the building, they're 100% owners, and they're not exactly convinced that they want to sell, they want to see what their deal is going to be, and then we get involved with seller's remorse. Any good stories or advice that you can give us? There's got to be good stories, because I can.
Oh, well, seller's remorse? Yeah. Oh, wow. I don't think there's a person who's sold a business who hasn't had a seller's remorse at the last minute. I can tell you that when I first started this and I was by myself, I had a client who called me at 6:30 at night, and we were closed. This was like a Wednesday, and we're closing on Friday. He said, "You call them and tell them I don't want to do this deal." And I said, "Why?" And he said, I've been thinking about it, and I don't want to do this deal." Okay. I'll call him in the morning. "No, I want you to call them right now." And I said, "I don't think that's a good idea." "No, I want you to call them right now." I said, "Okay, maybe I shouldn't be saying this in public." So I just said, good night, and I had dinner, and I cut the lawn, and I went to bed, and about 5:30 my cell phone rang, and Sammy said, "Have you made that telephone call?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Oh, good."
Question here. Could the panel provide their perspective on Facebook's acquisition of WhatsApp for $19 billion?
How many billion?
19.
19 billion. It was a Facebook acquisition for billions and billions, and as far as I know, Minneapolis hasn't had too many of those. But anyway, anybody have any comments on that?
There's a lot of wealthy young people out there right now. That's part of it. It's a change in, you were talking about it too, and it's a different world right now. And it's difficult to pause and try and figure out how in the world could somebody pay that much money for something? Because, a couple of million used to be a big number. Now it's billions and billions. And so can they sustain? Will this last? Where's the money coming from? It's really hard to value that. If you know somebody who's in that situation, let me know. I'd be happy to help them.
Well, this is a little bit tie into that topic, but I think as a business owner, you thinking about what the value is to you ahead of time, I think really makes a difference. So if you have a threshold in mind and you don't get there, you don't have to sell. And I when we took our other company out, we had a lot of interest. But when it came down to it, we agreed on the board how much we thought that we would be willing to take to return a good return to our investors. And the first time out, that didn't happen. So we stopped and said, okay, this isn't going to get where we need to go. Executed for another year, decided that once we hit a certain sales ramp, now that we understood more about where the value lay, we took it back out, actually sold the company before we went through a process the second time and got more than we expected. So I think having a threshold in mind that you don't have to feel obligated. On the other hand, if it's unrealistic and you'll never get there, that's what your team will help you realize.
I think I'd share the advice my dad gave me, and that's pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. We see it in our industry. It's fear and greed, and you really have to be honest and look at it. And that's again where that fresh set of eyes. It may be hard to hear, but it's real. And if you're going to expend the money and the energy that it's going to take to do a transaction, you have to come in with an open mind. But you know,
But you don't have to give it away.
no, you shouldn't give it away. And I would say that would be one of the cautions too, is just watch your equity. Don't give that away too quickly, because people have a tendency to do that.
All right, so as we kind of aim in the home stretch here, I want to give all the panelists 2 questions that they all can answer. First one is, what's one thing that a business owner needs to remember to avoid given this process? You can start over there, and we'll just
I'll
work
start
our
with
way
that,
in.
and you've heard the theme here, and maybe it's somewhat self-serving, but I just think going on the cheap is ultimately is going to hurt you, whether from a ultimate realization of your net after tax cash or risk exposure, or somebody made the comment on the panel, which is spot on, is that if you don't have the right team in place and the other side does, you will not maximize your deal. And so the thing to avoid in my mind would be don't go on the cheap if you're planning on selling your business, and find that right team.
Mark?
I'd say one thing to avoid is getting too far into the deal process that you can't back out of the process if you need to. And what I mean is you spend all your energy focused on selling the business and you stop running the business. Mm-hmm. Make sure you're taking care of business. The sale of the business is your night and weekend job to add to your other jobs. And you can get people to help you on it, but it is in addition to your main job. So focus on your business, keep at it, and know that if the worst case scenario, you walk away from the deal and you still have your business.
Thank you. Lee?
Well, I would say to avoid taking things personally. At the end of the day, it's a business transaction, so a number of people up here have said things about emotional response because you're so engaged in your business, but you really need to take a step back and look at it and say, this is a business transaction. It's not about me. It's not against me or whatever. And I think that's hard to do sometimes, but really important when you're going through this.
Thank you.
I would say on the post-sale, when it falls into our camp where we're doing the management, you have to watch for daily valuation. Our business, I can get on my phone and tell you the value of your investments. But with your business, it would be like somebody coming and making a bid for your business every single day. If that were to occur, you would go into a much different reaction, and all the short-term fluctuations would throw you way off. And so when you transfer your wealth from your business to yourself, you have to not get tied to that daily instantaneous valuation. You probably could agree with that. It'll drive you nuts. And life really isn't being up at 3 in the morning wondering if you're up an eighth or down an eighth. That just isn't what life's about. And so you have to be really careful with that.
Thank you. Chip?
I guess I'd say, unless you're really committed to sell, I wouldn't engage in a frivolous process with one buyer. We see that so much. It's usually a waste of time. There's nothing driving the buyer to move the thing forward. Getting information from you and stretching it out is advantageous to him, and most of the time nothing comes of it, and in the end you've potentially ruined a good buyer down the road. So I think if you're really not thinking of selling, I wouldn't respond to all these people who call you. They do this all the time. I mean, they got, all corporate development departments have young people who call up and contact you. And they're just tire kickers. And you waste a lot of time, and you'll poison the market about your company, and word will get out. You're better off to just keep your head down and keep doing what you're doing, and do it on your own schedule and with your own objectives in mind.
Great, good advice. Brian?
I would say, make sure you, from a banker perspective, avoid any issues with your financial statements. We talked about it a little bit already, but if you can provide good financials with good information, that's going to be the starting point. That's what they're going to ask for first. And so, you're going to start to maximize your value if you can really provide that right away, so that there aren't any issues with trust, for example. You're disclosing everything up front about what's happening in your business, trends, explanations, all that.
I have time for one question here. Yeah, Ward?
If you're in the mood, ready to get going on selling, do you have then 2 financial statements at all times, scrub financial statement and a tax financial statement?
You're asking me? I guess I'd like to think that you should have one that's a very high quality financial statement.
And where does the scrubbing come in?
I think the scrubbing comes in, when you hear scrubbing, how I view it is that, it gets to the disclosure and the full upfront communication with the potential buyer is that, making them aware that as long as it's not illegal, it's okay, but to make them aware that if there are related party transactions or things that may not be valuable to a potential buyer that are in your financial statements, that they're made aware of that, and then you can discuss and negotiate from there.
And then also forward-looking. Mm-hmm. That's the area that you can spend a lot of time on.
Maybe I'm reacting too much to this, but I would say, from our point of view, the process never begins with the financial statements. We've got a client right now who was approached by what would be a really good buyer, someone they never thought of, and the president came out and visited him and did the whole slap him on the back, make him feel great thing, and then he got turned over to the corporate development guys who sent him a 3-page list of financial information. Then they hired us. First thing we did is say, no, don't send them a thing. So we put together a presentation for them on the strategic opportunities of the business and what they've accomplished. And we were in Chicago on Tuesday. We went to see them because we wanted to have the CFO and the CEO and the corporate development guy in one room, and we presented that, and we didn't present any financial information except really high-level stuff. Because as far as we were concerned, if they couldn't react positively to the opportunity in the strategic story, why do they need all that stuff? And I was on the phone with them today, and they asked me for that stuff, and then a whole bunch of detailed stuff that I said, you don't need that to evaluate this opportunity. And that's what we do. See, it'd be hard for you to tell them that. But, we tell them that. We'll argue with them for 2 weeks over this. We'll win because they want to see the deal. But, I would never say keep a bunch of financial statements in and send it out to somebody. All you're going to get is an open file in some junior corporate development person's office, and they're going to drag it on and on and on, and you're going to wonder why you did that.
And a question over here.
I just have a question in regards to transferring your business to siblings. You have 3 strategies. Which do you feel is probably the best one to start at?
Well, it depends on the family and the structure. Yeah. I think in interest of time, the simplest way to put it is fair is not equal. We spend a ton of time with people trying to figure out down to the penny how to divide, and it just doesn't work that way. And so you have to really look at the resources and say, what's fair, and then move forward. So in business, to transfer your business, it may not be what people are thinking on the outside, and you have to look at what's the best for sustainability to the business. And a lot of times, the sibling might not be ready, and you're going to have to bring an outside resource in to pair that for whatever time period, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, to bring that person up. But you can still have the legacy piece there. You don't want to take the name off the building, but you just have to really pay attention to what's going on as far as the chemistry of the people. Because there's nothing worse than giving them too much and killing them. And that happens financially too. Mark was talking about estate planning. You don't want trust babies. You don't want your kids going, this is great. The company's been giving me all sorts of resources, which companies can do. That's an advantage you have for your family. But you don't want to make them non-productive citizens. You got enough of those, so.
That's for the next panel discussion. But to tackle this panel discussion, one last question. We can hit the 1 o'clock time. We have the room as long as we want. People can stay as long as you want, but just for folks that do have to run, I wanted to hit the 1 o'clock deadline. So the last question for the panel, we'll start at this end with Brian, work our way that way. We had talked about one thing for business owners to avoid. What would be one thing for them to remember to do as they go into this sale process?
We kind of talked about it already, but consult all your resources. I mean, people you're paying already. If you have a loan, you're paying your bank. Go talk to them. If you do your taxes, you're paying your accountant. Go talk to them about the sale. I mean, so those are some initial free resources. Your attorney as well, and then people that specialize in this. So make sure you remember to consult all your resources and think about the whole team.
I'd say be committed. It's a time-consuming, drawn-out process. If you're like a lot of entrepreneurs, it's the largest, most complicated sale you'll ever do, and it requires all of your effort, and there's no point in doing it unless you're committed to making it come. That's not to say that if you don't get the outcome you want, that you should do it, but you've got to be committed to this because it's a big effort.
Thank you.
I would summarize it. I gave you a white paper, say with a glass of wine or a cup of cocoa or whatever your drink du jour is. You can read this on your own, but 3 things. Build a team, develop a plan. And a lot of people hate putting plans together. I get that, but without a plan, you're probably not going to win. So develop the plan, but develop it early. And then when the transaction comes, the 3rd thing would be execute. And you can just be at peace, execute the plan, move forward with your vision, and feel really good about what you've done.
Thanks, John. Lee?
I would say that if you're going to sell your business, shop around for your partners because you spend a lot of time with those people over time. And I'll tell you, if you didn't like the person that you're working with, that shows up in your presentations to companies or who's ever a potential purchaser. So you have to have some chemistry with the partner that's helping you sell, and that's worth spending time to find.
Thank you.
I would say start early. We've talked a lot about it, but start early in the process. You don't want to rush into this, rush into a sale. I mean, once in a while opportunities come up that you do have to react quickly to, but most of the time they're not. And so even the fact somebody tells you that they need a decision this week on whether or not you're going to sell to them, you have more time. Take your time, make sure you're comfortable with it.
Thank you. And last but not least, Tom.
So as the line was going down here, 3 of the 5 things that I was going to say were said. So, and I would just want to echo, maybe just to finalize, and that is, be ready, make sure you're ready. Number 2, you made a great point, in my opinion, about, especially if you're going to be partnering with somebody post acquisition, make sure that you're compatible, your cultures mesh. And quite frankly, if you find the right culture and maybe the price isn't as much as a party that could give you more, weigh that, because I've seen situations where the cultures don't mesh and it's a bad deal, even though the cash may have been more. And then finally, you don't have to rush into it, and be patient, and make sure that you've done what you need to do to get your company ready at the highest possible price possible.
Thanks, Tom. So again, we have the room as long as any of you want to stay. The panelists can stay to answer any questions you have. I want to thank you for your time. And again, on behalf of the Minneapolis Club, Upsize Minnesota Magazine, and Club Entrepreneur, thank you very much.